Smart 24, driving business.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to today's edition of the Fat Talks. I shall be your host for today. My name is Ganyana Shiba Pasi, and I am happy and excited to be here with you guys today because we have a very, very interesting topic that we are bringing to you. We are going to talk about demystifying competition law and consumer protection. I'm sure many of you have heard the word going around. I'm sure those who watch news or read newspapers or even online on X, Facebook have seen that Uganda has recently passed the competition law regulations. And today in studio with me, I have two very important gentlemen who are going to break down the topic of competition law and consumer protection for us to understand. I know many of you at home are wondering, how does this have to do with me? How does it affect me? I've had many friends, many colleagues ask me, but what do these regulations have to do with me? Today you shall find out on Fat Talks. So without further ado, I would love to introduce our guests in studio today. Allow me to briefly introduce them. We have Mr. Sam Watasa. He is currently the Executive Director for the Uganda Consumer Protection Association. Sam served as the Vice Chairperson of the Technical Committee Cluster for the Law Reform Commission, where he developed the first draft and versions of the Competition Bill and the Consumer Protection Bill, to mention but a few. He is currently serving as the Executive Director of the Uganda Consumer Protection Association, and he's here with us to bless us and educate us with knowledge on consumer protection and competition law. We also have Mr. Michael Njenga. Michael is an advocate of the High Court of Uganda, and he has over 9 years of experience. He currently serves as a senior legal officer in the Regulations and Drafting and Compliance Department at the Insurance Regulatory Authority of Uganda. He previously worked as an associate at Okalang Law Chambers and KTA Advocates. Thank you so much for being with us today, Michael and Mr. Watasa.
Thank you.
Thank you for hosting us.
We are honored to have you here today. So to dive right into today's topic, we're talking about demystifying competition law and consumer protection. So I will target my first question to Mr. Njenga. So Michael, so many people here competition law. Everyone is talking about Uganda passing the competition regulations. But what exactly is competition law? To simplify it for an ordinary Ugandan.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a very basic but wide topic, I must say. So in competition is basically striving for or vying for business, and competition law simply is a regulation that regulates that conduct of businesses when they are trying to vie for business. So basically competition is good for a market like Uganda and any other market, because if you have businesses competing, that means lower prices, that means there is efficiency, that means there is creativity, that means there is consumer satisfaction. Now, where competition law comes in is because of that, those advantages are sort of one-sided. They are sided towards the benefiting the consumer. But these businesses are also interested in, profitability, having a bigger profit margin. So they are likely to enter practices that may actually have negative impacts on competition, or may want to do away with competition. What in the Act they term as anti-competitive practices. So the law basically regulates those anti-competitive practices, like anti-competitive agreements, or a company that is big, that enjoys dominant position, trying to use its dominant power to maybe eliminate all other competition, and or maybe regulating mergers. So that is the purpose of the law. The competition law basically regulates the way businesses conduct themselves while they are competing for business.
Okay, thank you so much. That was a very, very clear explanation. At least now we get the gist of what exactly competition is, because we have had people asking, what do you mean you're governing competition? What kind of competitions are you guys governing? But thank you, Mr. Njenga, for making that clear to us. So I'll move on to Mr. Sam Watasa. In your experience serving as the executive director, would you explain to us consumer protection and what exactly it entails when someone talks about consumer protection?
Thank you. Thank you, viewers, and those who may be listening without viewing, and I'm happy to be here and to speak to consumer protection with our audience. Now, where do we start? I am more comfortable being addressed as a consumer activist than an executive director, because it tends to come with an imagination that there is something huge out there. But consumer protection is grounded in the foundation of the methods, mechanisms, and production of goods and services for the consumer, the final consumer. So many times we get confusion around who is a consumer. In terms of consumer protection, a consumer is that person who buys goods or services for final use, or someone who benefits from goods and services as a final user even when they didn't buy them. So there we differentiate between a customer and a consumer. You could be a customer who is a consumer, but you could also be a consumer who is not a customer. In that category, we have what we would call conscripted consumers. People in refugee camps don't make decisions for what they buy. Children who are not of decision-making age, parents make decisions for them, those are consumers. People who are in public facilities, hospitals, they don't make choices literally for what they consume. So those are consumers even when they are not customers. So I just need to make that distinction. Now, where is the history of consumer protection grounded? Many decades ago, countries used to produce goods and services as public enterprises. The assumption was that the companies that belong to the state, what we call state trading enterprises, knew what is best for their consumers, for their citizens, and therefore produce goods and services that were fit for the consumer, both in terms of value, pricing, and delivery, which is distribution. Fast forward, the public sector, with lots of competing needs on resources, took the option of delegating, if you would wish, but actually freeing up production processes, distribution, to the private sector. Once that happened, then it became necessary to regulate the quality of goods that go to the consumers, because the public sector, i.e. governments, were no longer directly responsible for production, distribution, and marketing. That's where consumer protection starts from. And therefore, in recognition of the public sector getting out of production of basic goods and services, then we had a resolution coming out of the UN Social and Economic Council that binds governments, member states of the UN, to put in place measures to guarantee consumer protection within their jurisdictions. So that's the brief history of it. And so of course, down to Uganda, we went through this rapid liberalization of everything, the production of goods, services. Just if you mention to someone today that we used to have a public sector company that was importing and distributing radios and television sets in Uganda, they wouldn't know it, but we used to have a company called Uganda TV Sales and Service, which was importing that. Wines were being imported by a government company, foods and beverages. We used to have another company called Winnets Uganda Limited. All those were government companies doing this business. So at that point, there might not have been extreme need for drastic consumer protection measures. But once we allowed every Tom, Dick and Harry to import wine, to process wine, to import TVs, radios, then it becomes necessary for us to put in place measures to make sure that the products being brought into the country or being produced internally do meet the basic standards, technical specifications, and value for money for consumers. That's how we context then consumer protection. You will notice that one thing I've not mentioned, which is the common dropping point for consumer protection, is price. Yes. Within the element of consumer protection, we don't have pricing as one of those basic rights for consumers. Why? Because this is a result of the production processes and the costs that go in it. I could choose to produce a radio of 100,000. You could choose to produce a radio of 500,000. The quality might vary, but that is it. So pricing is not really the big deal. Where does pricing become a big deal is what Mr. Njenga has just explained, and that is how then consumer protection and competition law become Siamese twins. Because to get a better product on the market, you must allow competition. Competition drives research. Research drives better products. But research and development is costly. Now, business people might invest in research and development and get on the market a very good product. And then someone will shortchange this process and imitate that product. By doing that, they are introducing unfair competition. And unfair competition, therefore, undermines consumer value for products and services. So we get interested in consumer protection under competition regulation because, first and foremost, competition must be fair. And fair competition means that we do not necessarily have to regulate what you spend, but the quality of what you bring onto the market. I could possibly give one example quickly, and it's also one of those things that have been confused for so much. It's in the energy sector. We all use electricity, right?
Yes.
Now, when this sector was being unbundled, one company was retained as 100% government company. That is Uganda Electricity Transmission Company Limited. What was the thinking behind it? Because you are introducing many companies on the generation side, and you want to have a number of companies on the distribution side. But you need one backbone. If you made this backbone a private sector company, it can actually constrain some service providers on generation side or this side, and so constrain the ability to move the service to consumers fairly. So that probably will stop there and get into the details later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Watasa. I think you've really broken it down very well. Even I have learned a couple of new things because I was trying hard to understand the synergy between competition and consumer protection. But the way you've explained it has really brought it together perfectly well. And I like that you've mentioned, maybe if I can paraphrase, correct me if I'm wrong, consumer protection is about value, so the consumer gets value for their product.
Yes, it's about value for the product, but it goes up to what the consumer can benefit if they didn't get that value, which is what we call consumer redress. So the full chain starts from value and ends with what happens if I don't get that value. If I don't get compensated or redressed, then consumer protection is incomplete.
All right, I like that. Thank you so much for that really full explanation. I think all of us are now up to speed. Mr. Watasa has been generous enough to take us back into the history of consumer protection and how it even came into Uganda, and we are grateful for that. And you mentioned something because you talked about how consumer protection does not have to do with prices, and that's more on the competition side of things. And that's something I want to ask Mr. Njenga about, because there have been so many scenarios where traders can increase prices out of the blue. Like the price can increase from up to, let's say, 30% in such a short period of time. I think they call that price gouging. Yes. So in terms of price gouging, how does competition law and how do these new regulations plan to address this sort of thing? Because it's very, very unfair to the consumers.
Yeah, thank you, Shiba. Price gouging is one of the issues. It's not directly addressed in the Act, but a number of provisions talk about actions that may lead to price gouging. Now, price gouging basically, like you said, is when the traders, the businesses, the manufacturers decide to, out of the blue, increase prices. It can be based on the circumstances. Maybe the demand has shot up, or maybe there is a shock in supply, and the prices increase. I'll give an example. There was a time when we first experienced COVID-19, and people were buying masks at even 10,000, a simple mask of 500 shillings. And there are times when there has been sugar, supply of sugar going low, and then prices of sugar increasing. So all these circumstances have actually happened in our everyday life. Talk of sanitizers during the COVID-19. Now that was because of a pandemic or an epidemic that was happening then, but price gouging can actually be out of a non-competitive agreement entered by suppliers. But the suppliers themselves, the law prohibits actions where maybe suppliers enter into an agreement to reduce the supply of a certain item. And the effect is that the demand will remain constant, so the price will shoot up. So competition law comes in to prohibit such actions of maybe controlling supplies, entering agreements that have that adverse effect on the final price. Yeah.
Okay, that's very. Thank you so much for that explanation. I'm glad to hear that at least our regulations do plan on addressing that. And just to take you back, Mr. Njenga, because I know Uganda just passed this recently, these regulations. I think the bill was approved last year. Can you say that before then there was no control? Did we not have any regulations in place or any law that we were following? Was the market just all over the place?
Okay, thank you, Shiba. Well, even before this law,
yes,
there were different sector laws. I come from the insurance sector, for example, and one of the objectives of the Insurance Act, if you look at it, under Section 11, is that it is to improve fair competition, to ensure fair competition in the insurance sector. So different sector laws have regulations that actually regulate competition in that sector. There was no general law until this Competition Act of 2024. There was no general law of competition, but different sectors actually have their laws, and in their laws you'll find, for example, in the Communications Act, the UCC Act has provisions relating to competition. The Insurance Act has provisions that require approve of mergers, approve of distribution agreements like binder agreements and bank assurance agreements. All those are aspects of competition in those sector laws. But there was no general law that talks about competition for a businessman in Chikubo. And that's the difference that has, this law has brought on board.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I'm glad that you mentioned that there were different laws. To bring it back to Mr. Watasa, Mr. Njenga has mentioned that there were different laws governing different sectors. And I'm talking for the consumers now. How can individuals and consumers become more aware of their rights? Because most people may not read the law. They may not know that they even have rights. Some people, maybe till today, watching now, they're just realizing, oh, as a consumer, I do have rights. So how would you say individuals can become more aware of their rights as consumers?
Thank you. I was looking at the script and I'm thinking, okay, before we get into how do they become aware, you were initially talking about typical cases of consumer protection that are a result of absence of or non-implementation of a competition law.
Yes.
I'll just pick it from what Mr. Njenga has said. You see, competition regulation, competition law, and here I need to make a correction. What we have today in Uganda is not competition regulations. We have a Competition Act. We haven't yet developed regulations for implementation of that act, so I just need that to be very, very clear.
Yes.
The regulation will help us to determine to what depth we go to regulate competition. Because, for instance, when Mr. Njenga talks about mergers, you are not going to subject every merger to a competition law. Otherwise, you will never move. You will have mergers of a small company with about capital of about 50 million merging with another one of about 100 million. You can't take that one to a competition law implementation. We deal with it from the impact of what that merger would have on consumers. If it's not going to have substantial impact, you don't have to worry about that. Now, so the real life examples, he's just mentioned price gouging. You can only price gouge either if you control a substantial percentage of the market, meaning that the others cannot shake you up if you do that, or if you don't, then a number of companies in the same sector must come together and form either formal, informal, yes, but some form of agreement that enables them to then collectively command a certain percentage of the market, and then together they do price gouging.
Yes.
So, absence of a competition law or non-implementation of an existing law allows anarchy in the market, and anarchy will always hurt consumers, whether it is concerted anarchy or, So the basic examples, the first thing that you will see will be price trends. Those are the triggers.
Yes.
The prices might go down unreasonably. That will point to something happening in that industry sector. You can enter a sector and drive prices down, knock out competitors who are meeting reasonable market costs for what they use. And once they get out of the market, you then remain alone and the prices go up. So dropping prices suddenly is not good for consumers if the intention is to remove other competitors and then remain alone and then raise the prices. Those are very typical examples. Some of them are actually substandard products. Okay? Counterfeiting itself is a form of abuse of competition space.
Yes.
Because I have my brand, okay, I've invested in research and development, distribution chains, everything, and then you are going to come in and get a product and name it closely like mine because you haven't invested in the research and development and offload it onto the market at a much lower price because then you haven't incurred those other costs. The other one is typically happening. I don't know how well that can be touched, but you have a manufacturer, right? The manufacturer is on selling to a wholesaler who is on selling to a retailer. But the manufacturer has a retail license too, right? So you buy from a manufacturer, but you're also going to compete with the manufacturer.
Yes.
Those are some of the things that would require us to conduct a market survey inquiry to ascertain the extent to which they are affecting consumers and business sustainability. Okay? But we haven't reached there until we have the regulations in place that we can use to implement some aspects of the law. So then I will quickly answer what you asked. How do consumers know their rights? It's a tough question for an ordinary consumer. For me, it's not. There are two ways of knowing your rights. The first one is the reverse. That when you get something that doesn't satisfy you, please make formal complaint. Okay? And every time I've spoken about complaining, I make a distinction between complaining and grumbling. Grumbling is you bought water, it's not good, then you go talking to everybody who doesn't even care to listen, right? It's like getting a Bible and preaching by the roadside. Those ones you see. Nobody is literally probably listening. I don't know, but that's about what I'm referring to. Complaining is systematic.
Yes.
Start by getting a receipt for everything you buy. Anything you buy by the roadside when you are moving, you have no right of complaint because you don't know where you bought, you don't know who sold it to you. Get a receipt for everything. If you are dissatisfied, you complain. When you complain, you must know whom you are addressing the complaint to. And so when you do that, then those of us who know the inherent consumer right, we will know which right has been abused.
Yes.
Now, that is the reverse side of knowing them. The other one, which is the proactive side, is that you have consumers have to develop knowledge-seeking behavior. Very basic things that we start with. Forget about tomatoes in the market which are spread on the ground. Those ones, of course, I get many consumers complaining about that. But if you find tomatoes spread on the ground in the market, why do you buy them? Number two, we have these trolley tracking consumers, supermarkets, self-service markets. They go with children, and the kid is the one pulling things in the trolley. No one is reading an expiry date, but it's written there.
Yes.
And then when you get home, oh, this product I bought has expired. But you went to school, you know how to read, you know how to write. That I call functional illiteracy. Now, those are people who know their rights because everything you buy, which is a prepackaged product, has an expiry date. It has nutritional content written on the labels because that's the requirement of the international labeling standards. And that goes to help consumers that may not know the intricacies behind the products and services they are consuming. It allows them, even if they didn't know their rights, to find their rights protected within the production and supply chain. What is required of them is to exercise functional literacy.
Sure. Okay, thank you so much for that vivid example, and thank you for the additions. Just to reiterate on something important that you said, you did state that Uganda has passed the Competition Act and the regulations have not yet been passed. So I would also just like to emphasize that point in case there was a bit of confusion earlier. So the act has been passed, the regulations are yet to be put in place. So I like that you have mentioned some of the anti-competitive practices, Mr. Watasa. I wanted to bring it back to Mr. Njenga to see if he has anything more to add on the bit of anti-competitive practices.
Yeah, thank you, Shiba.
That could affect consumers.
Yeah, I think Mr. Watasa has mentioned most of them, but as I said, competition, actually competition and consumer protection are like sisters. They go hand in hand. Because if you don't regulate competition, the effect is that the consumers will not be protected.
That's true.
So of course the new act, the new law has different aspects that they prohibit that are seen as anti-competitive practices under the act. One of them is the anti-competitive agreements. For example, if you have exclusive distribution agreements, exclusive supply agreements, those ones where one company is enjoying dominance position and is using that power, that dominance, to abuse that position by trying to do practices that may affect competition in the market. I would talk about that. One of the issues Mr. Watasa mentioned was the undercutting of prices. You'll find that one big company, for example, or maybe two biggest suppliers of fuel decide to agree, and they decide to set their, or maybe the biggest supplier of fuel decides to cut the fuel price to half. You'd see it as if the consumer is enjoying. But in the long run, what that means is that all consumers will go to that supplier and the other businesses will collapse. So now, when they collapse, then he can come back and, either force them to take over, because if a business has collapsed, then it will leave the market. So he will enjoy the market all alone, and he can set whatever price he wants. So those practices are what the Competition Act is actually seeking to address. Some others are predatory pricing or price squeezing, or maybe dealing with certain distributors, or maybe dealing with certain consumers, or refusing to supply to competitors. Those scenarios happen in the market. Or maybe discriminatory selling can also lead to a practice that it can choke competition in a market. So those are some of the aspects that the Act actually seeks to address. Yes.
We talked about discriminatory selling, and I just wanted you to expound on it. Actually, I think I wanted Mr. Watasa to expand.
Discriminatory selling can be through the supply chain, like appointment of agents, and you decide that this agent will exclusively handle my products and not any other. Okay, let's go to the very life examples. In the recent past, before we go to the National Payment Systems Act, if you were an agent of, do they call them agents or whatever, mobile money, those kiosks operators, if you are doing it for MTN, you wouldn't do it for Airtel. Exclusive distribution. So I have a point here, but I can't go there because this point is for MTN and the other one is for Airtel, is the other side, until that was opened up and you can have it together. These are very basic, real-time consumer experiences, which you wouldn't ordinarily factor into the competition law implementation, but that's what happens. And so competition law will therefore help to open up those, remove those exclusive agreements. Some exclusive agreements are for a good purpose, if they are for monitoring quality without interfering with pricing. Now, what typically happens is the competition law protects consumers and protects suppliers so that you have a sustainable marketplace. You could have a scenario where there is the market balkanization. You could decide and say, I am going to give you, Shiba, this product, and you must sell it only in West Nile. And it shouldn't find its way to Western Uganda. And then you give me a product and say, for you, you will sell exclusively here. But then the prices may not be the same. And eventually, when we get into the details of this, much later in the near future, when I say later, I mean deep into the subject of competition regulation, you will find there is something we call counter trading. Okay? Illicit trade is not necessarily like something is illegal, but you could decide that the tax here is lower, the tax here is higher, so let me pass this product through a lower tax territory and get it here. But that is a subject for a lot of dictionary work. Ideally, what Jenga is talking about is you decide to control the distribution chain, so you constrain supply and prices can go up or go down. So you trigger down or up as you wish. Okay? If you understand the way, do you go home for Christmas?
Yes, I do.
Every 20th, eh?
Yes.
How much do you pay?
The prices are so high.
The prices are so high, only one way.
Yes.
Either going or coming. How many times do you hear a minister saying that prices must not go beyond here? And they always go. And nothing happens.
That's true.
Because you don't have a mechanism for regulating those prices.
Yeah.
That is a subject we'll deal with another time. But I guess that's what we're talking about in terms of constraining supply. Because the competition law doesn't deal with only the company. It deals with also the mechanisms you reach the consumer.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for that in-depth explanation. And I would just like to move it next to Mr. Njenga. As we all know, you are working with the Insurance Regulatory Authority. So could you enlighten us on how the IRA enforces competition law in Uganda?
Yeah, I think IRA is one of the regulators in Uganda that has been very keen on competition and consumer protection, especially consumer protection. Of course, IRA regulates competition through reviewing, for example, binder agreements of insurance distributors.
Sure.
You find that companies do deal with brokers, with other insurance intermediaries, so they sign agreements that are distribution agreements for insurance. Some of those are binder agreements, some of those are bank assurance agreements. So those are reviewed to make sure that actually they don't have aspects in them that might stifle competition in the market. The other aspect I would talk about is regulation of commission rates, for example, to brokers. We have a full regulation on that. There are aspects of consideration and approval of mergers and acquisitions. For example, we do consider mergers, but like Mr. Waters has said, we do look at the impact of a merger in the insurance market to ensure that it does not probably stifle competition. For example, if 5 biggest insurance companies are merging, we would not consider such a merger, because such a merger would have very negative impact. It would actually create a monopoly and maybe increase the price of premiums. So such regulations do help us to enforce competition law. We do also regulate consumer protection at IRA. The regulator has a complaints bureau where insurance complaints are filed, and if in case one of the parties is not satisfied with how they have been treated by an insurance company or any other licensee of an insurance company, or licensee like broker, bank assurance agent, a person can actually always go to the regulator and file a complaint, and it's free of charge. And if the regulator makes a decision, that decision is actually appealable to the Insurance Appeals Tribunal. So we do regulate consumer protection, we do regulate insurance products themselves. Before an insurance product is put out on a market, it has to first be looked at by the regulator to see that what they are selling is not actually air. It's actually insurance. It's a promise that if a loss occurs, the insurance company will pay. Yeah, so that is intended to protect the final consumer, because an insurance company can decide to sell to you a product where maybe the exclusions are taking away the liability. So we do look out for that when we are assessing for approval. Then also we do assess marketing products to see that they are not deceitful or they are not trying to mislead the customers of insurance companies. So the IRA has been very key in terms of, and I think it has been fast ahead in terms of consumer protection and competition regulation.
Thank you so much. It's good to hear that IRA is very compliant and is also pushing protecting consumers and pushing following the Competition Law Act and regulations. So just to take it back to Mr. Watasa, Mr. Njenga has talked about the IRA and how they are promoting competition law and how they also have a complaints bureau. They strive on making sure that their consumers are entirely protected and they are getting value for the money that they put in. In your field and in your years of work, what do you think are the biggest challenges in promoting fair competition and consumer protection in Uganda?
Okay, first of all, the consumer protection law is not in place. That doesn't mean that we don't deal with consumer protection, we do.
Yes.
Competition Act is nascent, just signed recently, and therefore, is there anything to learn from it? No, because it's not yet operational. But what are the biggest challenges in implementing that law? I will place them in one particular aspect, and that is public sector. One of the biggest challenges for implementing the competition law in Uganda is going to be government, for two reasons. We are not used to having a level playing field, right from investments, domestic, attraction of foreign investments. You have a whole range of incentives that are provided by the public sector, some of them under clear laws like the Investment Authority Act. And then you have others that come as government subsidies that are not known until they happen. So the grounding of competition regulation is to create a market, an economy, a jurisdiction that allows for fair entry and exit of private sector companies. I have had so many things and questions coming my way ever since this law was signed on. It's a new demand on private companies, going to increase the cost of doing business and whatever, all that. None of those. Competition law actually enables lower cost operation in a market because it makes it predictable, both entry, existence, and exit. Okay? However, the practice we've come through, because we went through liberalization, privatization, which was not regulated.
Yeah.
Now we come back and think we want to regulate. How do we regulate? Public sector entry into the business sector. Now, typical example, I was listening to you yesterday, okay? You have a directive that all these contracts should go to NEC. NEC is a government company, gets money which is cost-free, but you have private sector construction firms that have already invested, and they must compete in the same market. So, how are we going to deal with statutory funded private sector and public sector to create an even playing field through implementation of this law? That is number one. Number two, the law creates an environment and a legal framework for regulating competition and vests the mandate to regulate competition in the Minister for Trade, Industry and Cooperatives. The Minister of Trade, Industry and Cooperatives is bound by cabinet collective responsibility. If cabinet decided to create a monopoly, now monopolies are not bad per se, but the conduct of that monopoly in the market is what we look at when we are dealing with competition regulation. So cabinet decides we are going to put in place this company, and this company is going to sell product X or service Y at this price. Okay, the consumer has not been part of the negotiation process. We don't even understand the costs of production, but it has been put in place. How do we then use the competition law to make sure that this monopoly or whatever is going to play the game according to the competition law as enacted? So that's going to be a big problem. The second one is a compliance issue. Are private companies ready for implementation of that law? Number three, are consumers going to bring together the necessary information? But that one, you can do what we call a market conduct investigation. One of the areas I'm very keen to understand is how commercial banks play out and have almost the same interest rate across all similar products, Nyumba loan, house loan, this one. I think that it's an area that is worth understanding. Yes. Not that they are abusing the market or their collective powers, but we just need to understand how it happens this way.
How do we come to those figures?
So that is it. Ideally, therefore, I can summarize that while the law is in place, the institutional and public policy dynamics in the country will make it difficult to implement that law.
Okay. We love your honesty. Thank you for that insight. For those who are just tuning in right now, you are watching FAT Talks, a faithful, available and teachable talks brought to you by the Fidelis Leadership Institute, hosted right here on Smart 24 TV. Today we are dissecting the topic of demystifying competition law and consumer protection, and in studio with us we have Mr. Michael Njenga and Mr. Sam Watesa, industry experts who are taking us through everything we need to know and understand about competition law and consumer protection. Mr. Sam Watesa was just taking us through the difficulties and challenges that are yet to be faced with promoting fair competition and consumer protection. As you know, the Act was recently passed, but he has mentioned that one of the challenges will be implementation, making sure that both government, private institutions, and consumers are compliant, and also evening out the playing field with government-funded companies and also the private sector. So we are yet to see, we are watching this space. I hope the process is transparent enough that the public will be involved. And it brings me back to one of the questions I wanted to ask, both to Mr. Njenga and Mr. Watesa. You've talked about the regulations not being in place yet and how you're going to conduct market surveys. Is there a way someone, an ordinary citizen in the public who's interested in taking part in the exercise, is there a way they can take part? Is there a way they can help? Because I'm sure you will need to get this information from the typical Ugandans. If I'm not mistaken.
Yes. I think what is important is implementation of a competition law has aspects to it, and a lot of the information is derived from the market, from consumers. Some of them you get whistleblowers. I happen to have to be part of the regional framework for competition regulation in COMESA, so I understand where we start from. Sometimes you get this information from former employees, because some agreements are made in bars and restaurants and they are not written anywhere. So you get that information somehow. Then you conduct formal investigations. Some of it from the triggers, pricing. So it's a more structured process of conducting the market investigation. The public can only provide us with information when it reaches that level of happening. But what you mentioned that is important, then the public, especially the business sector, should be interested in what the regulations will look like. Because it's the regulations that will help us to say this is how we deal with this part of the law when we sense that it's going to be abused or misused or used in a manner that is likely to abuse the context of the Competition Act.
All right, thank you so much. Mr. Njega, did you have something to add?
I think you
Said it all. Okay, right now we're going to go for a brief commercial break and we'll be back to wind up on our topic for today. Stay tuned.
Smart 24, driving business.
Bulu magic is my joy. Ono bulu magic wange. Ayo Talaba kumabala atukuza nonyirira okirako enyange tayisa bubi fabric kyonna kyekiri kigwa lwa bulu magic is my choice. Ono bulu magic ye wange. And the bulu magic is my choice. Hey, ono bulu magic ye wange.
Amanya gange nze Namutebi Sharon nga nkolera wano wennyini Saka Kirombe oba Makindye. Empangula gye nawanguddemu ssente mbadde nga nkozesa mobile money nga nsindika school fees w'omwana ku ssomero. Okutegeera nti mpangudde nze mutima neegambye nti kambalinde bamale okujja ndyoke nzikirize nti mpangudde. Kyennyinza okubagamba nti si byabafere weewaawo abafere gye bali naye ennamba eri emu yokka era bw'eba ekukubidde omanye eyo si yabafere. Mpulira bulungi nnyo era ndi musanyufu nnyo. Naye MTN mobile money mbebaza nnyo mwebale nnyo mwebalire.
Together we're unstoppable.
Are you a female business owner in Uganda looking to grow and transform your business? Grow empowers you with access to entrepreneur services, accelerating your business growth from micro to small and from small to medium enterprises. Grow provides comprehensive support, including training, startup tools, business formalization, certification, networking opportunities, access to affordable credit and grants, coaching, and mentorship, with all resources available for free. For more information, please visit grow.go.ug. Contact the PSFU Grow officers at Trust Towers, ground floor, plot 4 Chadondo Road, Nakasero, or the Ministry of Gender at plot 2 George Street, Simba Manyo House, 3rd floor. Call us at +256 394 514 071. This message is brought to you by the Grow Project, a Government of Uganda project implemented by the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development and PSFU, funded by the World Bank. Grow, generating growth opportunities and productivity for women enterprises.
Luxury redefined at Seasan Hotel has you endowed in the splendor of elegant living fit for the royalty that you are. Step into comfort, pampering and blissful customer-centric service as you select from our range of comfy exquisite living quarters furnished to meet with your royal preference. Surrounded by scenic beauty, our tropical setting allows you to escape the glamorous ordeal of city life. Our ambient green gardens will guide you to a place of revitalizing rest. The 3-star restaurant caters to your palate, serving your choice menu ranging from exotic cuisines to local delicacies. Our chefs will serve you full course meals for a truly out-of-this-world culinary experience. Our fully stocked bar to whet your throat, from renowned global brand whisks, brandies, gins, beers and wines to our locally celebrated beverages, you will not lack for any brewage. It's an all-new experience in the East at Seasun Hotel. So visit today at Plot 15 to 19 Spire Road, Ginger, or contact us on +256 751 719 960 and +256 785 354 614 for reservations. Seasun Hotels, luxury redefined.
Smart 24, driving business.
Welcome back to Fat Talks, the faithful, available and teachable talks. I am your host for today. My name is Ganyana Shiba, and today we are tackling demystifying competition law and consumer protection. In studio today with me are two experts on the subject, Mr. Sam Watasa and Mr. Michael Njenga. They've been taking us through the competition law and consumer protection, and we're going to carry on with this very interesting conversation. So to kick off where we left off, gentlemen, we talked about how the Act has been passed in Uganda and the regulations are still on the way. I would like to address this question to both of you. What do you think are the differences? Because I know that the East African community already had some treaties in place.
We have an act.
Yes, and an act in place. And how do you think our act fares with the one East African community? Are there any differences? Are there any similarities? Did we pick a lot from that act? Yes, if you could enlighten us and viewers.
Yeah. Okay, I don't know if it's... Thank you.
You can go first.
Yeah, thank you. I have looked at, I've had an opportunity to review other laws on competition. I've looked at the East African Competition Act, the COMESA competition regulations. I think one of the key differences, they may be similar in terms of the provisions, in terms of the prohibitions, but one of the key differences, the point of the differing point is in terms of administration, the structure of administration. You may recall, I think, when they were presenting this act to Parliament, Parliament had insisted that that we have a COMESA Competition Commission authority. I mean a competition authority in Uganda, but I think it was going against another policy of government, which was rationalization. So Cabinet and the President actually did not take up that proposal. So they decided to form a technical committee, which will be the one in charge of implementing this act in the Ministry of Trade. The act has not yet come into force. It has mainly delayed, I think, because of that reason of the structure and also the regulations, because the act does not have actually a commencement date, the Act of Uganda. Now, other East African countries, the difference is that for them, their act have special competition authorities, which are intended to regulate competition and consumer protection within the markets. And I think for me that's the main difference. But in terms of the prohibitions, in terms of the regulation, I think most of the provisions are more like similar, apart from that structure of administration. Now, I think one of my opinion on administration, and I think I've read articles that raised concerns on whether an administration and a technical committee may be good enough. I think some scholars have written concerns regarding to mainly on the independence of a technical committee that is under a ministry, because it's going to regulate actually all markets, including those monopolies that are set up by government.
That's true.
So it might be prone to political interference or maybe inefficiencies, because you don't have a specific people dedicated to that particular thing of regulating competition. But then I think that we live to the positive side is that we have now an act regulating competition, and that's the key thing. And the regulations, I think, are in the pipeline to implement that act, and we live to see and deal with whatever comes up.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Mr. Njenga. Yes, Mr. Otasa.
That's a long story that I would tell, but I've told it over and over, except that some people may be hearing it for the first time, so I'll still go back to where I have told it before. Similarities, differences. There is one fundamental difference, of course, between regional laws and our domestic laws. The ESC Competition Act deals with market conduct of cross-border nature. So if a merger is going to be consummated by different companies that have operations across borders, then the regional law applies. Sometimes we will have situations like we do have now. Several cases have come up where you have companies that are consummating a merger or intending to merge or acquire others or takeovers, have operations across more than ESC countries, and so then the Commercial Competition Commission regulations apply. Of course, there will always be a difference. Why is this? At commercial level, we don't have an act, we have regulations. But regulations, because the treaty itself provides for the institution. So, to that end, local or domestic competition laws help the regional institutions to enforce their decisions. But at the same time, when you need to do a market conduct assessment, you will need those institutions within the member states to be able to do them and provide that information for decision making at the regional level. So back to the specific issue you've asked, which is the implementation parts of it. Competition laws are more or less the same across jurisdictions because they deal with exactly the same content, context, and implementation. Now, the trouble we have with our own act before we take off, and I must say the ESC Competition Act itself was amended before we even implemented it because of exactly the same shortfalls that were in that act that we have put in our own act. So we might even reach that level where we need to amend it even before we implement it. But the good thing is that once you have it in place, then you are able to see the gaps quicker. Rwanda took this direction and put it in a department in their ministry. They left it because it didn't work. We will learn from them because a number of countries have tried to take this direction. But one thing I just need to demystify, because we are talking demystifying a competition law. Competition commissions, agencies, or institutions, whatever their name, actually are income generating for their own operations. For everything you take to a competition commission or competition authority, whether it's a merger or an acquisition or whatever, you're going to pay fees. These fees are the revenue that these commissions and authorities use. Across the world, they generate their own revenue. Okay, initially you could say first 1, 2, 3 years, maybe they would need that level of support. Yes, but eventually competition authorities actually make their own money. Sometimes more money than they are supposed to be given. We will keep having that discussion, and I think that at some point the country will have a good and implementable Competition Act. So they are supportive of each other, like I said, regional. Something where there is a merger within Uganda alone, companies doesn't have to go to the regional level. But again, those are dynamics that come from the regional level. Part of the reason actually that drove us to have this Competition Act is because the EAC Competition Act requires partner states to have laws of this nature to support that activity at that level. I mean, I could go on and on about cases that have happened in between countries, Uganda, Kenya. We have, which is this recent stream of supermarkets. What do you call it? Carrefour. You know, Carrefour was fined a lot of money in Kenya for market conduct that was not compliant with fair competition. I keep repeating, it affects business people here. Suppliers are given unfair contract terms. Suppliers eggs, so many trays for 3 months before we pay you. Come on, I mean, it's just not tenable that you are going to survive on other people's money for 3 months before you pay them, and yet you are supposed to be doing business in the same market environment.
That's true.
So yeah, I mean, until everybody understands that the competition law will facilitate fair, even playing ground for both businesses and consumers, the better for the country.
That's true. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that enlightening explanation. I think our viewers now know the similarities that our act has, and from your explanations, I think we're doing pretty well. Right? Right. So, just to take it back to, before we wind up, to take it back to consumer protection, we were having a very interesting discussion during the commercial break with Mr. Watasa, and he talked about guarantee and warranty. I personally didn't know there was a difference, but Mr. Watasa was kind enough to take us through the differences between guarantee and warranty. So, Mr. Watasa, I was kindly requesting if you could just enlighten our viewers on the concept of a guarantee and warranty for consumers.
Okay, thank you. And first of all, I do not know whether everybody understands. You can get into a dictionary and find out the meaning of guarantee and warranty. But I'll give you my personal experience as a way to drive this point home. I do a bit of traveling in the region, out of the country, and the most common thing that I get as a request from people, buy for me this from out.
Yes.
Because our mentality is that what you buy from out is good.
That's true.
Okay? And I keep telling people, I rarely buy anything, because how do I enforce what is given to me as my right?
That's true.
So, there is a warranty, it's a product warranty, and there's a product guarantee. The basic difference is that a guarantee is a manufacturer or producer's commitment to a product, whether it's a phone or a radio or a pen or whatever, name it. As long as it has a guarantee, it's a manufacturer's commitment that for the period the guarantee exists or is valid, the product can be replaced as a result of factory errors that may have occurred. The warranty on the other side tells you, look, if something happens to the product, then we will repair it and bring it to usable condition. I have bought a phone here, okay, and after 2 weeks, I kept noticing that there was something on the screen that was not proper. And later on, when I checked it out, I found that actually this is probably a factory error. I took it back where I bought it, and they replaced that phone by giving me another one because it had a guarantee. So, understanding that difference allows you then to make an informed decision. And what I was discussing with you is that if you find a product with 1 year warranty or 1 year guarantee, That means the producer of the product can only confirm its functionality effectively up to 1 year. Whereas another one will give you a functionality guarantee up to 5 years. So you either have a warranty 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, guarantee 1 year, 2 years, whatever the period is. Just so people can appreciate how deep we go into trying to help consumers survive.
Thank you so much for that in-depth explanation. I personally find that very useful because, you know, most times when you're going to buy tech gadgets, you just pick, and I didn't know. Now I feel like I'm going to be striving.
And look at the camera.
Yeah. I'm going to be striving to get. Sorry, I'm going to be striving to get a guarantee, because and to make sure that the time is durable. So as we wind up today, we have been talking about demystifying competition law and consumer protection. With us in studio, we have Mr. Michael Njenga and Mr. Sam Watesa, who have taken us through the entire topic of competition law and consumer protection. And just as we wind up, I would like Mr. Sam Watesa to take us through, just tell us about the Fidelis Leadership Institute. For those who do not know, the Fidelis Leadership Institute, partnering with COMESA and the Consumer Protection Association of Uganda, launched a competition law and consumer protection course that is yet to start in August. So I'm going to let Mr. Sam Watesa tell us more about that for those who are interested more in this topic.
Thank you. Again, I start from the reality that this is a new area in our country in terms of the law itself, but in the absence of the law, interest in consumer protection and competition law was simply not there. Okay? And there are a number of things that are driven by policy of government or laws. Those whose mind can stretch back to when procurement started to become the go-to course at universities, because that's the time we had the Public Procurement and Disposal of Assets Act. And so it drove the desire to professionalize that field. And that's how we ended up there. So you would think that now that we have a Competition Act, it will interest members of the private sector, academia, civil society to understand or to seek to understand what is this about, how will it affect us, what do we do to comply, and what do we do to support those who want to comply. Because if I want to file a merger, it will require people who understand the dynamics of what goes into filing that merger for it up to the time when it's approved. How does this relate? Probably I'll just skip a bit there. With IRA has a section of the Act that deals with competition regulation. UCC Act the same has it. I think Electricity Act the same, yes. Right? Now, there is always this debate that these will clash. They don't clash. What happens with a typical competition regulator is that areas that where technical competence for the merger, for the acquisition, lies in a sector regulator, then they refer that matter to the sector regulator for interrogation and appropriate recommendations, because you're not going to have all of that together. So now, because of that, we do not have the ready-to-go human resources that are able to handle the implementation of the Act. Because we have companies that from the word go, once we start to implement the Act, we'll need to file for compliance. Voluntary compliance is provided for, where when you comply, there are no penalties, there are no fines. If you don't take the voluntary compliance route, then you are going to probably be fined. Now, for someone to be able to look at the law, look at your business operations, look at your market, assess your market, conduct, probably tell you, by the definition of the Act, if you are controlling 40% of the market, then you're a dominant player. Now, if you're a dominant player, there is something you have to do to comply. Being a dominant player is not a problem per se. but the conduct of the dominant player in the market. Okay? I mean, ideally, you would want domestic companies to grow as big as you would want them to be, but however big they grow, they need to operate within the precepts of the law. Okay? You would want to have a Microsoft in Uganda, big company, but it must comply within the law. If you track developments elsewhere, you'll know that Samsung was fined a lot of money for making a product was so close to iPad. Paid a lot of money. So it's something for which we recognize the gap, and we need to have the necessary human resources. So the course is designed to provide entry-level knowledge on competition law and consumer protection, and subsequently it can go into detailed aspects until probably the academic institutions have picked up then what I would call the academic study of competition law. What we are dealing with now is to provide sufficient training, knowledge, and ability to actually have a smooth implementation of a competition law in Uganda, but also to have people trained enough to be able to take up cases to support clients who may not be Ugandan because they will come in here from elsewhere as investors, and they want to understand what is it that I have to do to comply with market regulation in Uganda. You need such people. For now, we deal with the independent sector laws, and we don't give a holistic a picture. I was reading something in the Standard, I think UK, Madivani Group is introducing some very interesting technology there, but they are still waiting for approvals from the regulator. If it's here, we would have already offloaded it on the market. Now, the bottom line with that is that serious investors don't go to markets where competition laws don't work. Because you are going to throw your money here, and the next day there is a directive and you're out of business. So competition law protects investment. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for that insight. I hope our viewers are well informed. So those who are interested in gaining more knowledge about competition law and consumer protection, kindly sign up for the course. It starts on the 7th of August. It's a 3-day course, 7th to 9th of August, and it will be at the Sheraton Hotel, Kampala. The prices are $700 for physical, 750, I beg your pardon, $750 for physical attendance and $400 for online attendance. So if you're interested in competition law, consumer protection, you're interested in joining the field, or you're just interested in gaining the knowledge, we'll have experts from all over Africa coming to train you. And just for clarification, because I've got this question from so many people, is this only targeted for lawyers? Because so many people see the word law and they think it is for lawyers.
Well, even if they saw the word law, law is primarily, actually, law is not for lawyers. Law is for the common citizen, because it deals with protection of your rights, how you get remedies. Even if you went to court, all you needed Mr. Jenga for is to represent you, okay? To make sure you get a fair hearing, right? But the law is for you.
That's true.
So you need this lawyer to help you, because he can interpret the law. Now, competition law is the same. Competition law is for businesses, it's for consumer protection, it's for investors, it's to make the market predictable for consumers, for business people, and the government's responsibility is to make sure this happens. So, competition law is not for lawyers. That's number one. Therefore, people who are in, especially industry associations, if you are an industry association and you have your members, are you just going to have them as members? They must get value. If they get value, you need as an industry association to have people that are knowledgeable in competition law and regulation in order for you to help your members access the right resources for compliance and for fresh investments. So for lawyers, yes, because many of us will want to run to a lawyer, and they help us to interpret the law and to comply. Okay, so for lawyers to be good competition lawyers in other jurisdictions, this is one of the most sought after legal aspects.
That's true.
Because it's living, it's going on and on and on and on. And so it's not for lawyers. Anyone who is interested in understanding how a competition law affects their business and how they are going to stay longer in business, and a consumer who is interested in appreciating and explaining to others how competition law works should be interested in this course. I must make a disclaimer right here. Many people think I'm a lawyer. I've never stepped in law school, but I am probably a paralegal in competition law. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. So viewers, I hope you have heard. We hope to see you sign up for this course, the Competition Law and Consumer Protection course, brought to you by the Fidelis Leadership Institute in partnership with COMESA and the Uganda Consumer Protection Association. So with that being said, I would like to bid you farewell. Thank you so much for viewing us today. Thank you so much for participating. We'd like to thank our guests, Mr. Njenga and Mr. Sam Matasa. Thank you for taking your time and enlightening us in this very interesting topic. So to all of you at home, see you next time for the Fact Talk. Have a good evening.
Thank you, viewers, and goodbye.